Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. It has been 5 years since it last happened, but the leaders of Canada, Mexico, and the United States met at the White House today. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador joined President Biden at a time when border security has been a flashpoint of Republican criticism. There will be no press conference with the three leaders. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with more on what was discussed about migration at the meeting.
Every country in the Western Hemisphere has, of course, been impacted in some ways by migration events in recent years. A lot of people, Mexico has been as well. That's my point there. And leaders in the region have a shared interest in humane migration management. We, of course, our views, we have to address these issues together. So this is certainly an opportunity today to have a further discussion about it, about what more can be done. And certainly more can be done and should be done.
Meanwhile, former President Trump is again calling out Republicans who supported President Biden's infrastructure bill, which is now law. As he is still suspended from Twitter, Mr. Trump used an official statement to aim his most pointed barbs for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. An attorney for President Trump's former top advisor, Steve Bannon, argued in a virtual court appearance today that his client needed more time to review the related charges of defying a subpoena from the House January 6th Select Committee. CBS News has learned the committee has received information from nearly 200 witnesses. That's about 50 more than they'd indicated weeks ago. And the House took up the president's social and climate spending bill this morning. Speaker Pelosi expressed optimism that the measure would ultimately reach President Biden's desk.
This is historic. It is transformative. It will help us build back better with women and all those who had not previously had the full advantage, but with this workforce development and the rest in the legislation.
The bill has a significantly better chance of clearing the House than it does the Senate. Just this morning, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin said he has not decided whether or not he'll vote to proceed on it. For more, let's bring in Steven Portnoy, Courtney Subramanian, and Zeke Miller. Steven is a CBS News radio White House correspondent. Courtney is a White House correspondent for USA Today, and Zeke is a White House reporter for the Associated Press. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Zeke, I want to start with you and some news just out. Apparently, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office is out with its score on the president's Build Back Better bill. Bottom line here, does that help or hurt the president?
The fact that it is out helps the president. The whole reason why this vote didn't happen a couple of weeks ago alongside that infrastructure vote, as progressive lawmakers in the House wanted, was because they wanted, because moderates in the Democratic conference in the House wanted to see the CBO score. So the existence of a formal CBO score of that package helps. The numbers, digging into the details, are still sort of coming in. And it's a lot of math that we all got to do in the next few hours here. Paint a sort of a mixed picture of what this looks like. But in terms of the House vote, and the House is trying to proceed as soon as Thursday evening on this, this is good for this package's prospects in the House. As you mentioned before, its fate in the Senate, though, because of the score, it all comes down to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that, Stephen, because the prospects in the Senate do look a bit dicier, as Zeke says. So what about that? Now that this score is out, obviously, as Zeke says, people are going to be digging into those numbers. But Senator Manchin, once again, and Senator Sinema appear to be where all of the attention is going to be focused here for the White House.
You know, Senator Manchin was actually here at the White House today. He was actually walking on this driveway behind me a short while ago, not to meet with the president or perhaps to discuss the Build Back Better bill, but he was here because the new director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy was being sworn in, and Dr. Gupta is from West Virginia. So Senator Manchin came by to see the swearing in. Look, before he came here to the White House, Senator Manchin was up on Capitol Hill telling reporters that he wanted to see a few things. He wanted to see the final text of the bill, and he wanted to see that CBO score. It is, as we speak, Elaine, too early to know the full ramifications of the CBO score because, frankly, as we're on the air right now, it's just coming out in dribs and drabs, and we need to fully analyze it, and certainly up on Capitol Hill they do. But one of the things that Senator Manchin wanted to be certain of was the idea that it would be, as the White House has repeatedly said, fully paid for. Senator Manchin was also asked about the potential inflationary aspects of the bill. This is something that the White House insists would not have a negative impact on inflation. And Senator Manchin also said he wanted to see the final text of the bill, and that gets into some of the machinations that go on having to do with the special rules that Democrats are using here, the reconciliation rules. And there needs to be, this is the parlance of Washington, the privilege scrub and the bird bath, essentially certain rules that apply in order for Democrats to use the reconciliation process, which Republicans in the minority can't by themselves block. This is the ability to pass a budget bill, essentially, on a 51-vote margin, with 50 Democrats and Vice President Harris breaking the tie. One of the things we learned today from Speaker Pelosi is if there are certain provisions that the Senate parliamentarian feels has to come out of the bill, well, then those provisions would have to likely come out of the bill, and then that amended bill would wind up on the House floor as early as tonight for final passage.
All right, we'll continue to keep an eye on that. Meantime, Courtney, President Biden met with the leaders of Mexico and Canada today. Why no press conference, and what was on the agenda?
Well, first of all, it was a massive agenda for all three leaders. As you mentioned, this is the first time these leaders are convening for this summit. For the first time in 5 years, former President Trump did not hold the summit during his presidency. And it's taking place in a markedly different landscape than the last time it happened in 2016. They're confronted with a pandemic. And this meeting is usually more about symbolism than substance, but we're expecting this to focus on setting a new agenda for North America, given former President Trump's fractious relationship with Trudeau and former Mexican President Nieto. But, as I said, a lot to tackle: COVID, supply chain issues, migration, climate change, and, of course, the looming question of China and the Biden administration's drive to deepen cooperation to counter China. But also some of the White House, some of the protectionist policies we've seen the Biden administration pursue has cropped up already. The president met with Trudeau this afternoon and said the two would discuss Canada's concern over a proposed electric vehicle tax credit in Biden's social spending plan that Canadian officials say violate the revamped trade agreement all three countries signed in 2018. And he's meeting with Lopez Obrador now, where regional cooperation on tackling the root causes of migration, of course, are a huge issue, but also frustration over Mexico's reluctance to join the global effort to curb climate emissions. We know Biden has made the climate change a key part of his agenda, and will use any chance for a meeting with heads of state to discuss climate change. But as you mentioned, there is no press conference. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said earlier today that he takes questions, he's answering in fool's phrase, but again, with symbolism versus substance, a lot to discuss, but this appears to be more about resetting the relationship and setting a new agenda for the region.
All right, Zeke, speaking of Jen Psaki, at the White House press briefing today, she highlighted some of what she said the White House is doing to deal with inflation. It's interesting, Zeke, because as you know, in recent weeks, she and other White House officials have been using this word transitory quite a bit to describe these higher prices that Americans have been contending with. What is the tone like now? Is transitory part of the conversation from White House officials when it comes to these higher prices?
It is certainly not public-facing anymore. But behind the scenes, that's really what they believe, is that higher prices pretty much across the economy are still a factor of the economic disruption caused by the pandemic and the people's changed behaviors. More people are shopping on Amazon and ordering in food than going to restaurants. And that's the shift from the service economy to the goods economy has raised prices. Businesses coming online and delays in goods getting into overseas, slowdowns in the ports, people not wanting to go do certain jobs, all that. And there's a lot of truth to that, and a lot of experts across the aisle agree with it. That said, that is not a winning political argument. So what we're seeing from the White House yesterday and this week, and we'll probably see over the next couple of weeks, is sort of this drumbeat of efforts on the part of the administration to call on businesses and to lower prices and reassure Americans that there is ample supply of goods they're seeking. Efforts to sort of examine, call on the FTC and other independent agencies to investigate potential price gouging or price fixing across different markets. We've seen that already with the White House sending a letter to the FTC to asking them to investigate gas industry mergers. We're likely to see that coming up in the meat packing industry going forward as prices there rise. That's, again, a little bit more show than substance, but a shift from the party administration that just saying it's going to go away eventually when the pandemic goes away isn't a winning political argument anymore.
Yeah, a shift in the messaging on that topic. All right, on foreign policy, Stephen, President Biden said that the U.S. is considering a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Why is that, and what might that look like?
What might it look like? We don't know. The press secretary was asked today because the president, as you note, Elaine, did say, as he sat alongside his Canadian counterpart, that is something we're considering. This is a response to a question about reports that the U.S. is considering a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics. Now, as you know, the United States and other countries send dignitaries to these Olympic Games every 2 years. And, for example, Dr. Joe Biden, the First Lady, was at the Tokyo Games just a short while ago, earlier this year. So the president is saying that a diplomatic boycott of these Beijing Games is something that's being considered here. And why? The press secretary gave an indication as to why. Jen Psaki said because of human rights abuses. And that is something that the White House made a point of noting did come up in the president's conversation with Xi Jinping earlier this week. We have not heard about that from the president this week because the president has not elaborated at length about anything he's been talking about over the course of the week with his meetings with foreign leaders, with either Xi Jinping or the leaders of Mexico or Canada here today.
All right, and finally, Courtney, recent reports have said Vice President Kamala Harris is being sidelined or underused by the White House. She responded to those claims in an interview on ABC's Good Morning America.
So you don't feel misused or underused?
No, I don't. I am very, very excited about the work that we have accomplished, but I am also absolutely clear-eyed that there is a lot more to do and we're going to get it done.
So late this afternoon, the Vice President's office announced the communications director is leaving in a few weeks to pursue other opportunities. Courtney, do we know what's behind these reports of tensions?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the vice president has pushed back on this report, and we've heard White House aides vehemently push back publicly on the narrative. With Press Secretary Jen Psaki coming out this week, calling her a key partner, saying, she's taken on these incredibly important assignments, which are intractable issues like voting rights and migration to the U.S. southern border. They argue that Psaki and other aides have argued that, part of it is that she's the first female vice president and the first woman of color. And so she faces more scrutiny than others, and she's been a Republican target since she took office. But I would say that this is not new. I mean, you have to remember that when Biden was vice president, there were tensions that bubbled up between his staff and former President Obama's staff, and that's something we saw play out when they were figuring out how to staff up the White House this time around. But she has played a more traditional role of the vice president. She held separate bilateral meetings with Trudeau and Lopez Obrador today. She's taken on a pretty big diplomatic role in the administration, holds virtual meetings and meetings with heads of state, and went to Guatemala and Mexico and Southeast Asia earlier this year. She was in Paris last week as part of the U.S. mea culpa to mend relations with France over the submarine deal with the U.K. and Australia. But I think the context here is the bigger question over, a second Biden term and whether Democrats support her role as the heir apparent and some of the frustration, over the president's poll numbers, party infighting and rising inflation. Has sort of raised anxieties about the future of the party and who is the person to lead it. So I think you'll continue to see the White House publicly push back on this, but staff infighting is not a new concept in the West Wing.
No, absolutely not. But as you say, I mean, already with 2024 as sort of the framework for this, I think you're right. We're not going to probably be hearing the last of this kind of thing. All right. Steven Portnoy, Courtney Subramanian, and Zeke Miller, great to talk to you all. Thank you very much.